everybody. Good Tuesday afternoon and welcome into today's episode of Great Quarter Gals. This is our show here on FreightWaves where we talk about awesome women doing awesome things in the freight and logistics space. And I'm Kaylee Nix here with Gray Sharkey.
Hello. Hi, Kaylee. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. We're all in a good mood here right now in Chattanooga because it's 73 degrees outside. It's sunny. It feels amazing. It feels like spring. And I think you guys are getting warm up there in Michigan too. So are you guys in that same kind of vibe right now?
Yeah, it's funny. I have my windows open even in here right now, and I was telling someone it's got to be like 70, and it's 50 degrees, but the sun's out, and it feels great. So, just living in delusion up here. That's what it is.
I think it's so funny. It's always like when you're transitioning from winter into spring, right? That first 50-degree day feels so good, and you're like, bust out the flip flops, bust out the tank top, and then the other opposite's true when you're going from summer to fall. As soon as it hits 65, you're like, all right, I need my sweater, I need my pumpkin spice latte, I want it all. That's hilarious because I totally empathize with you on that, Grace.
Yeah, I'll top that list off with I need a pedicure stats. So I can transition
Agreed.
into those cues a little bit differently too.
Happy spring, almost summer, and we are glad to be here for another episode of Great Quarter Gals. And we are super excited to welcome in one of our other writers here at FreightWaves. Brielle Jakel is going to be joining us here in just a few minutes. She's our deputy editor, one of our writers here, and also now the host of our latest FreightWaves show launch, Tracks Through Time. Before we introduce Brielle, Grace, her show is all about history, and of course, there's a lot of history-defining moments in freight, and we're going to talk through some of our favorites. Specifically, starting with you, what's one of your favorite history-making or historic things that have happened in the freight space?
Well, one in particular, I actually did a really great episode probably a year ago now on point of sale, is honestly the revolution of females and how most women became in charge of shopping or finances within the household. The creation of department stores was actually a huge step towards liberating women. And they called it Ladies Mile in New York City. It was over 440 buildings, 28 blocks near 15th Street and Park Avenue South that were just all department stores. And it led to kind of the first real reason that women had, I don't want to say excuse, but a reason to leave the house and explore the city by themselves. And it ended up leading to really the female consumerism we have today from late 1800s to 1910. In less than 40 years, 90% of household spending was done by women by then. And that ended up leading to women being able to boycott stores for better rights, leading to the wonderful 19th Amendment. So I think there's just so many different things that happen in our history, even here in the U.S., that actually have stemmed from supply chain or logistics, retail issues or advancements.
I love that, and I totally agree that that's one of the most interesting things about the freight space too as well. And something that I think is really underrated, right? But it also shows the power of the American consumer, specifically in a time where the American consumer was very minority female. So I love that. That's a super interesting one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Another favorite one to take it all the way back, if we want to go all the way back to when this wonderful country was created, look at something as simple as the Boston Tea Party. I mean, you can say, okay, well, how does that work exactly? I mean, at the time, we had tea, of course, from England, from our motherland, you could say. And at that moment in time, it was being forced and held at the port for us. We had to pay taxes on it in order to take that off of the boats. We didn't want to pay taxes on it, right? No taxation without representation. And there also was a ton of competitors in the tea space too that were much closer for us to trade with, but we're stuck in this situation that we were at the time. So what did we go do in the middle of the night? We dressed up as Native Americans and went out and dumped over $1.7 million in tea into the bay, which, I mean, it's kind of crazy to think if that ever happened today. Like, just right, we got LA port worker issues coming up. If they were ever to strike, just dumping all of our freight into the ocean and standing up for what they believe in. Don't do that. Don't listen to me, port workers. But I'm just saying, historically, it's kind of interesting to like consider even the economics behind right that trade and how it led to what America is today.
ILWU says, forget about negotiations. We're just going to take the containers and literally push them into the ocean. Let's not do that. Let's not do that.
Let's not do that.
Let's not. Let's keep it peaceful. Let's keep those negotiations sane. Of course, Grace, I feel like we can't continue to talk about the history of freight in our country without talking about the Pony Express, because of course, we all know that this is one of the first things that led kind of cross-Western expansion in the United States. That's one of my favorite pieces of freight history, because you've got these two gentlemen who were in the freight and drayage business who thought, you know what, let's start this organized, dedicated mail system and talk about spanning the one very, very wild West at the time, going from Missouri all the way out to California in the mid-1800s, right at the end of the Civil War, right as we are kind of in this manifest destiny period. And they're like, you know what? We're going to create mail system. Granted, it only ran for a little bit, but it kind of set the standard for what the U.S. Postal Service is today, I almost feel like.
Yeah, and the standards of it. I mean, back then it was like you write this letter and you're like, oh, I hope it gets there. And like, and I say back then like it was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It hasn't been that long, and now we're at this point where it's like we've got even the post office has its own competitors for how quickly it can get your letters from point A to point B. So. Well, and then you got the competition of email, but like into all of that, it is fascinating to see where our industry's roots lie. And I mean, I guess to even think about the tech advances, just even in the last couple hundred years from all this as well.
Absolutely. So with that, let's bring in our FreightWaves historian, our deputy editor, Brielle Jakel. And Brielle, you've now been hosting Tracks Through Time for a couple weeks. You've had your articles, which are FreightWaves classics. You've been writing now here for a couple months. How has your FreightWaves journey been so far now that you've gotten kind of into the swing of things?
Oh, geez. I mean, it's great because first of all, I'm talking about history and transportation, and I get to, still do my day job where I'm like crafting stuff behind the scenes. So I get the best of both worlds. I mean, I'm just happy, and the team members here are great, and I'm just excited to be given a platform to be able to, take history to the next level.
Yeah, and it is such a fun like experiment to like choose all these different topics, right, in history, and I mean we just named some crazy ones at that. I know the Pony Express is one that I've seen us cover in the past as well. Why do you think it's important for our audience of all the updates we give them of their supply chains, the tech behind it, the big players behind it, the advancements? Why is it important to also showcase the history of our industry as well?
Well, I'm going to start with I'm not going to lie. It's interesting. These stories are exciting to read. It's like, to me, it's like watching a movie, listening to a podcast. Well, now I have a podcast. I just think they're interesting stories. And that's what I look for is, stories that people are going to gravitate towards. But it's also so important that we look at history. I mean, I just got done a future episode that my next episode, I just finished my interview for that, and it's on the Silver Bridge collapse. And it's so important because it was a tragedy, and it was terrible. In the 40s, number of people lost their lives, but that afterwards they kind of realized how to look at bridge safety in a different light and how regulations needed to be. Because I mean, that was in the 60s, and a lot of lives were probably saved afterwards because they realized, how important it is to kind of keep looking at bridges and updating them, throughout time instead of just set and forget. And I mean, that's true for a lot of stories in freight. I mean, history repeats itself is not a joke. That's not I don't know, a false statement. We see. I mean, I've been covering things stuck in the canal more than once. I'm covering rail strikes from the 1800s. It comes back around, but then also we learn. I think it's really important, and it's just interesting, man.
I 1000% agree. And one of my favorite things about being in Chattanooga, of course, we've kind of coined the term freight alley, and that's been kind of this modern assessment of our freight space because of the logistics companies and the 3PLs and the trucking companies that exist here. But people also forget to remember that Chattanooga was a major freight rail hub in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. That's one of the reasons why it was put on the map, right? Chattanooga itself is this crossroads between Birmingham, Atlanta, Knoxville, and Nashville, Tennessee. You are right in the X. And so much freight moves through here, not only over truckload in modern times, but also through the railroads that we saw back in the mid parts of our history, in the middle parts of our country. And I think that is something that is also super fascinating, is how important freight was to building out these cities across the United States. When you look at some of those stories and how just essential that was, is there anyone that really sticks out to you? Maybe like a city that you think wouldn't have been as important or as big as it is if it didn't see the history with freight that it had?
Jeez. All of the United States. Yeah, first of all, Detroit's huge in auto and manufacturing. I mean, it's really just everything. I can't think of one in particular, but we wouldn't have, the West would not be as populated today if it wasn't for trains and things like that. I mean, trains are really exactly what kind of like pushed this country moving forward, and it's all layered on top of each other. And that's another reason why I love history, is because it's like this leads to this, leads to that, leads to that. And tons of it is also like not knowing that your town or this city had this huge, industrial history. And that was the case for a lot of like old cities back in the day. I mean, the town I grew up in, I found out later, once I got really into history, that we have a huge part to play in the Revolutionary War. We were Stafford Township. We were one of the last battles in the Revolutionary War, and you would never know. But we're also the town a couple. Like about a half an hour south of me is like this huge blacksmithing town that was like super important in terms of creating the metals of the early colonizations. And I just think that kind of history is just like really crazy interesting. And I mean, for instance, my name, Brielle, I just found out that name is popular in my area, but nowhere else in the United States. And I found out it's Dutch and it's super popular in the Netherlands. And there was a huge industrial rush in my area in the 1600s where that Dutch people came and they were, trading, and they really established this town based on the trades.
I'm not sure I understand.
That's crazy. It's funny. I even recently looked into my history and I found out I was a daughter of the Revolution. My 8 times removed great grandfather was the delegate of New York to sign and ratify the Constitution. So it's like I love it, right? You get to find all these like fun facts, and you're right about like it's interesting to think like another one of my favorite examples. If you look at history, is like. And also into now, Houston, right? The Panama Canal just recently got expanded, and now we have more freight coming in. Like the city of Houston, I'm excited to see how it grows, right, over the next decade, just based off of the freight that we now see moving into the city and the investment that goes into the city. And like, that's the stuff that's super cool. Sonar users, go check out the Panama spread. It's one of our actual, you can see in Sonar when it's better to ship into Houston compared to going to the West Coast. Fun fact, it's Houston right now. But it's like that kind of stuff. It's crazy. Like the history can go into the analytics, and it's it just all combines. So I love the work that you're doing. And I guess for you, looking into maybe the future, especially tech that we see coming out, is there any, I guess, history that you're excited, or events that you're excited to maybe see or uncover that would become maybe the next big historical event? Something, I mean, even like look at the Suez Canal. But is there any like adaptions or adoptions of or changes in this industry that you think 10 years down the road we'll look back at headlines and say, wow, this was a huge game changer?
Well, first of all, it seems like every day there's history making
Yeah, right.
events happening in the world, obviously, but I mean, it goes without saying that the artificial intelligence right now is at a completely different level. I mean, Chat GPT is just taking the world by storm. And it's probably going to change a lot. I mean, the battle between EV and keeping regular gasoline is going to be important, and automation in general. So it's interesting to see where these things will go, especially since we're talking about them all the time, and you have like polarizing, camps. But I do have to say, like, just think back at when people are scared of robotics and automation taking over people's jobs. But, you look back and, the automobile was invented. That was an invention that came about where people were not thinking that it was going to take off. Some people were like, oh, this is a fad. It's just a toy. Horses are going to be our main, way to go. And then cars took over, and the carriage driver, his job was obsolete. So, that like things change, but we're still okay. It's just seeing where we go in the future. I mean, there's room for both, I believe, automation and human workers.
One of the most fascinating pieces about freight history for me is, of course, the people who are able to tell those stories. And when we think a lot about our population who works in freight, specifically the drivers who have been behind the wheel for decades, right? I think about Ingrid Brown, the stories that she tells about her time on the road, or my boyfriend's grandfather, who was a truck driver for 60 years of his life, 64 years, and he's still driving. This man is 82 years old. He lives in North Georgia. He is still driving. He's literally going out to South Carolina next week to host like a driver training and driver championship competition. Amazing, right? And the stories that people tell about their own personal experiences, about their experiences with companies, with tech innovation, are completely invaluable. Brielle, I would consider you like a true freight historian, digging up these stories. How do you go about finding these people and talking to them? And maybe it's not a historic event as in a world-changing or market-altering, but it's an important and changing event for these individuals. And it's a story worth being told, right? How do you go about finding those and making sure that you do either personal history or event history justice?
How do I go about finding experts, or how do I go about finding stories?
Stories, just anything that you think is worth talking about when it comes to history.
Well, when we first started, behind the scenes, there was a sponsor, and I had to take it over kind of quickly. And so we needed to really get content out. And at first we were like, but, it's history. There's only so many, stories that are out there. And in my time since then, in the 6 months I've been working on classics, that has completely changed. We've realized there's just like an endless number of stories that I want to cover. I have this notebook that's later. I was furiously writing in it because I heard you, talking about Grace, that one story of women, and I was like, oh, I gotta revisit that. It's just, I have this notebook is full, and then I have a tabs of just stories I think are interesting and that have made an impact. So I kind of just keep my eye and my ears open. I mean, I'm like a connoisseur of like history stories. So I'm always like watching the History Channel. I'm on This Day in History every day. I'm in museums, in the backlogs, and all of the podcasts I listen to are true crime, Bravo, or history. So I kind of like, I kind of keep my, eyes and ears open that way. And because I'm just like immersed in it. So I kind of, and the second I hear a story, I write it down. And then, I look into the Library of Congress is great for any kind of like research or resource that I need. And then I'm always in the museums, really. I'm just like always like bothering the curators, talking to people like, is there an interesting story? There's a couple stories I found that way because I was talking to somebody and somebody at a museum or somebody in the history world, and they were like, did you know about this story? And that's how I get into that. And it's really fun uncovering these crazy stories that some of them are lesser known, some of them are everyone's known about, but then I take a second look, I'm like, wow, we didn't know this.
I love that you brought up the crime aspect, because the first episode we got to do together was, of course, on Goodfellas and the incredible story behind that, and of course the freight relation to it too. And you got to speak with people at the mob museum as well, which is really crazy. That must have been fun for you. Is there any other cool stories or crime stories that you can sneak peek to us, or anything that you're investigating now that hopefully we could see in maybe future episodes?
So I can give you something spooky.
Yes.
Well, the one that's coming out next, like I mentioned about the Silver Bridge collapse, is actually huge in folklore because it is known as one of the Mothman prophecies. So if you're not if you're not super aware of like cryptids and stuff like that, there's a cryptid named the Mothman, and he's this shadowy figure with red eyes, vaguely resembles the shape of a man as a moth, and he kind of is the foreteller of doom. And it is said that before the bridge collapsed, people did see a Mothman-like creature near the bridge or in the town with red eyes and everything before the collapse. So that's kind of spooky. I get into that a little bit, and then we hear about the how that changed safety in general. But I love the folklore part of it. I mean, obviously it's terrible disaster, but I like looking at the fun aspects of things.
I love it. And Brielle, before we let you go, I've got to wonder, any thoughts about maybe taking your stories to social media, like to TikTok? There's one lady that I follow on TikTok, and she does like spooky lakes, and she talks like all about the history of the U.S. waterways and stuff like that. I think your content is awesome, and I feel like you could do like frightening freight or like freight frights or something like that, and it would take off with people.
Okay. You just secretly viewed my notebook, I guess, because I've been planning that. I've been planning doing like fun history stories, but doing more like less, I don't have to focus on freight as much as if we're in transportation, and doing more like spooky things like that. And I live in, I don't know if it's as popular nationally as it is well known here, but I live in Jersey Devil territory. Jersey Devil's supposed to be this creepy cryptid that lives in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey, and that's where I live. And there's a hike that they're gonna take people on as part of like, the county does these special hikes, and they're gonna take people on and talk about the history of the Jersey Devil and stuff like that. And I was thinking about doing some TikTok stuff and going on that tour.
I love it. I would absolutely recommend and tune in for that.
I love that. Thank you so much, Brielle, for joining us. I mean, this is going to be incredible. Where can people go and get your content, and what day can they check out Tracks Through Time?
So Tracks Through Time airs every other week on Thursdays. So our next episode comes out on the 20th of April, and you can check that out on FreightWaves TV, or you can download it on any of the major podcasts apps. And then if you're interested in reading some classics, you can just go to freightwaves.com and click Discover and go to FreightWaves Classics. And all my stuff is right there.
If people have a story they want to tell you, can they reach out on social media, LinkedIn, and maybe get you to cover something that they find interesting?
Yeah, of course. So you can find me on LinkedIn at Brielle Jakel, and then on Twitter, I'll post some stuff that isn't worthy of like a whole article or, someone else's stuff. So if you're interested, just follow me at Jakel Brielle on Twitter, or you can shoot me an email at be Jakel at FreightWaves.com.
Awesome, Brielle. Thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, go read, go watch, go listen, and interact with us there on FreightWaves.com. Grace, let's talk a little bit about where the people can find you, because you are gracing the audio waves every single weeknight here on Sirius. Talk to us a little bit about the show.
Yeah, go check out the show. If you guys have SiriusXM, we are on channel 146 every single day, Monday through Friday, from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, broadcast from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Or you can check out about 2 weeks of episodes on demand as well. Tonight we have wonderful Thomas Watson with us. We also have founders from True TMS. They're going to dive into how they use drivers' help in order to build a TMS perfectly for the small and owner-operators out there. So go check that out tonight and every night, Monday through Friday.
And speaking of small and owner operators, we have our next FreightWaves TV event coming up in just about a week and a half. So perfect segue into that, Grace. Our Small Fleet and Owner Operator Summit will be coming up on the 26th here on FreightWaves TV. Free registration for that one. Going to have some great speakers. We've got OIDA tapped in for that, as well as hopefully getting a couple of owner ops themselves to tune in and give us their insights. So head on over to live.freightwaves.com to get registered for that one. And while you're there, sign up for our next State of Freight webinar. That's going to be our founder and CEO, Craig Fuller, with Zach Strickland, our head of freight market intelligence. That's next Thursday at the 20th at 2 p.m. Grace, where can the people find you on Twitter?
You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. Go follow me on LinkedIn. Keep up with all of these wonderful updates. Google me. I've just been saying that lately because it sounds cool. So we're at that point. The SEO is working. So put a Grace Sharkey FreightWaves, and you should get my link tree to all of my social media sites as well.
There you
Google
go.
Kaylee pops up as well.
The SEO working wonders for us. Thanks, Grace. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see y'all next week.
1, 2, 3, ho!